Hi everybody, Jason with Apartment 5. This video is not an instructional video. It's not a video review or anything like that. It's just a story and to give you guys something to think about. Back in about 1983, 1984, I met a guy. We called him the Cajun Mountain Man, or Cajun or Mountain Man for short. He was born in 1900 in the swamps of Louisiana. At 14 years old, he took off and headed up towards Montana, working odd jobs along the way, stopping here and there, staying a month or two, making some money, and carrying on his trip. And when he got to Montana, worked odd jobs until he found a permanent job in a sawmill. He worked that permanent job in a sawmill, staying in a boarding house, essentially. It was just basically a room with a small bed, um, a basin bowl, and a pitcher that they would bring water in every day for you to wash up with. He worked that job for several years, saved his money, and walked off into the mountains, found him a nice piece of land, bought it, built a cabin. And there he lived off grid without any amenities for many years. One day he decided it was time for a change of scenery and started heading in a southeasterly direction. Made it down to somewhere in the Appalachians. I want to say somewhere between Ohio, Virginia, West Virginia, that area right in there. There again, worked odd jobs until he secured full-time employment, saving money. Well, during that time, he met a young lady. They started courting, fell in love, and got married. They had 2 kids after about 8 years of marriage. The marriage failed. They sold the house. He took that money. There again, finding another piece of land, building a log cabin, and he did not really come down off his little piece of land there in the Appalachian Mountains, except for about every 3 months to get supplies. And the supplies he would come down and get were very basic items: salt, sugar, whatever, rope, string, twine, whatever you want to call it, that he would need to take care of his homestead and what he did up there. When he was about 65, 70 years old, he broke his leg and it had to be surgically repaired. And he didn't think the surgical repair was going to work. He thought they were going to have to take his leg, and he wouldn't let him. They decided he wouldn't be able to live on his own, so it was either a nursing home or go live with family. And he had a hard time tracking him down and getting anything done with him, because this is a guy that never obtained a photo ID or driver's license or anything like that in his life, never even owned a car, never drove a car. He went everywhere on foot or horseback. And even through, the 1920s, horseback and horse and buggy were not uncommon. So eventually he gave him his real name and everything, and they tracked down his kids, and his oldest daughter happened to be married and grown kids of her own, and probably a grandkid by the time this happened. Lived in the town that I lived outside of. I lived outside of town in a rural area, a very rural area. And went and lived with her, and we'd all see her, but he never really talked to anybody. One day, while at the little store in town getting some stuff for the house, he come up to my dad and said, I see this young man back at the gravel pits fishing all the time. Dad's like, yeah, well, sounds about right. He goes, I want to give him something if that's okay with you. Dad goes, if you want to give him something, it's okay with me. You can ask him if it's something he wants or if he wants something and go from there. He come up and he reached in this burlap sack that everybody always seen him have on. Never seen him out without it. He pulled out this fishing lure and he was telling me that, it was about 1930, 1931 that he carved it. And I've never seen a fishing lure like this before. It was just round and it tapered off towards the back, kind of like from the fish head to a tail, how a fish would taper off. He painted it white, except for the front tip of it was red. Had a little eye screw in it to tie your string to, and it had two three-pronged hooks, like a grappling hook on the underside of it. He was telling me, how he carved that in 1930 or so, and, he always seen me fishing and he wanted me to have it. I graciously accepted it, and, I thought it was pretty wild that this guy I don't even know gave me something that he made that's been with him for all them years. So, a few days later, I walk into town, stop in at the store, got a little something to drink. He come in, grabbed something to drink, and we started talking. Next thing you know, we're sitting up on the bridge and we're talking about life and how he grew up and his life story. It's a pretty amazing guy, the way he lived and what he did. I can tell you, man, this guy lived life on his own terms without any doubts, and he lived freer than any of us could ever hope to live. That is for damn sure. I asked him, what's the deal with that bag? And he goes, my possible bag, my haversack. Yeah, everything I need to survive is in this bag. He goes, everything in there I had both times when I walked up into the mountains. And we talked a little bit more, and he's like, okay, here's what I got in here. A knife, a little hatchet. I've got this rope, and it wasn't really rope. What it was either some kind of hemp twine or baling twine. It's about 100 feet braided. And an old black colored pistol. Very small old cook pot. Wasn't much. And I'm like, don't you need more than that to survive? And he looked at me and he kind of laughed and he goes, if you need more than this to survive, you ain't never growed up poor and you ain't never played in the dirt enough. And him saying that always stuck with me, so I get what he meant. That was primarily everything he owned. That was everything he felt he needed to survive any situation. And growing up in the swamps and in the mountains, as a very young man, I would guess you develop skills to where you don't need a lot of stuff. He had rope that he could use to improvise and build a shelter with. He had a small hatchet to cut wood with to build a fire. It just was what it was. Now, granted, when he built the cabins, of course, he bought a bigger axe and probably some kind of handsaw. But what he had was very minimal. And it's like he said, even in my cabins, if I walked off, everything I would have to start over again and that he would need to start over again was in that burlap sack. And I sit here today and I tell you this story. Because I can't help to think, we've got these get home bags and we've got god awful amounts of gear. Could any of us carry something like this? Now, his was probably a little bit bigger than this, if memory serves me right, but this is just a Polish haversack or bread bag or whatever you want to call it. It's roughly about 12 inches by 9 inches, probably 2, 3 inches, probably about 3 inches wide, maybe 4 inches wide, expanded out. Could any of us nowadays fit everything we needed to survive in a bag like that? Now, granted, I know times have changed. We're more populated now. Back then, any flowing water source, whether it be a pond, a mountain stream, as long as it wasn't stagnant, um, especially mountain streams, that were constantly flowing, the chances of getting something that would make you sick out of the water were very low compared to nowadays. Especially if you were near the source of the water where it was coming out of the ground. And the rocks and everything, would definitely purify anything that would be in the water that could make you sick. So times have definitely changed since then. But you can't help but to think, even our ancestors 150, 200 years ago, how little they started out with, how little they came to this country with. Coming here and working, or maybe bringing a very basic set of tools with them and what they built and how they live their lives. It's pretty amazing to think about. And if you had the opportunity to talk to someone like Cajun, that was born in 1900 in a swamp, and to hear him describe the house as a one-room house that measured 12 by 14 feet. It was a shack. I've seen sheds bigger than this nowadays. you know, and how he grew up, how they grew, hunted, and foraged their food. How outside of that short time he was married, he grew, hunted, and foraged his food. Makes me wonder, living in this modern time, how much we take for granted. How much freer we might be if we lived like him. Would our lives be any different? Would the nation be any? A lot of questions when you talk to somebody like this that grew up in a different time period, in a different way than any of us. Makes you wonder, gives you something to think about, gives you a minute to pause and read. Hope you guys enjoyed this story. Nothing great, nothing wonderful, just a story and some thoughts, and maybe give you a little something to think about. Take care of yourself, take care of one another, and stay safe.